Hey y'all, welcome to my channel. If you're new here, my name is Samantha Leighanne and I talk about books. Hello, this is the glorious return of the King Chronicles. This is one of my most highly requested series. I'm sorry that it has taken me so long to start filming these videos again. It just takes a lot of brain power to put these together and the research that goes along with them, so it's a little bit slower coming than some of my other series, not to mention the fact that, you know, I took that extended break and all that stuff. But I'm finally, you know, I seem to be getting back in the groove of things, especially since it's spooky season. And I've, you know, done the spooky things on my bookshelf, so I'm excited about that. So today, you know, in case you didn't know from looking at the thumbnail and looking at the title and seeing this behind me, today we're going to be talking about the Dead Zone. So as a general reminder, just kind of the way that I go through and format these videos, we talk about some facts about the published work itself. I talk about my thoughts surrounding the work. We kind of deep dive into some of the characters, not necessarily the plot. And then we talk about some of the themes that are recurring through this book, as well as any connections that are made within the Stephen King multiverse. I also do want to point out when it comes to connections that I am looking for the most part with works that have been published up until this point. There are many of these works that I'm going to be discussing as we go along through this. I've only read roughly 50% of King's body of work, and we all know that so many of his books interconnect, but I'm not going to be jumping forward and talking about the ones that have yet to be published at the time of writing this book. We're just going to kind of be going backwards as far as that goes. Once again, a disclaimer, these are my thoughts on the book. You may disagree with how I feel or the themes or whatever, and that's perfectly okay. You can leave a comment below and we can discuss, but I'm gonna delete you if you want to get nasty with me, okay? So anyway, let's just dive right into this. Today we're talking about the Dead Zone. This was actually my first read through of this book and I loved it. I actually would place this in my top 10 King books, which, spoiler, that video is coming. This was published in August of 1979, and when it comes to genre, this is actually more of a supernatural thriller. So up until this point, we've seen a lot of horror. We did see dystopian with The Stand, but this, to me, is one of his first forays into really the thriller category. This is his first Castle Rock novel, and we will see Castle Rock many, many more times as we continue this journey together, but this is the first time that we are seeing it. This was also his first hardcover bestseller. When it comes to facts about this, I honestly couldn't find a whole lot. I do know that there is a film adaptation starring Christopher Walken, as you can see from this mass market that I have over here with his face on it. It's got a couple other pictures from the filming of the movie in there as well, so that's fun. But that's the copy that I read, and this is my display copy because y'all know I'm that extra. Again, I couldn't really find a whole lot of fun facts about it, so we're just gonna move on to how I felt personally about the book. As I previously said, I do feel like this quickly became one of my favorites, and I think that that's because this was something very different than we had seen from him up until this point. This, to me, is also where we really start getting into the connections into the multiverse. We have seen a couple little connections sprinkled through here and there, but I think that this is where he really starts to use that. This is a plot that is a lot more intricate than a lot of his other books, and I think that that's one of the reasons that I enjoyed it so much. Not to mention that, and it is very much a slow burn. Salem's Lot is one of my favorites. Again, most of you guys know that, and one of the reasons that I love it so much is because it does have that slow burn quality, and this also really has that. There's a lot more character development in this than we have seen up until this point. A lot of his books previously had a lot of like one-dimensional kind of flat characters, and this to me was one of the first times that he really went hard into that character development. And again, if you watch my channel at all, you know slow burn character driven stories are some of my favorites. I can forgive a bad plot if there is a lot of really good character development, and I feel like he really like hit that in this book. And you can tell that he really focused on the characters in this book, because if you think about it, there isn't really one central bad guy in this book. There's not really, there is kind of a good versus evil element, you know, but different parts of the book focus on different people. And so there isn't necessarily one central bad guy. It's just Johnny going through and discovering what he can do, and you know, how those things kind of affect the whole. Really, that journey is what made Johnny such like a sympathetic character to me. You know, he wakes up from this coma and he's got this gift that he never actually wanted, and knowing that he has this gift, he has to do something about it, you know? He's the type of person where knowing what he knows, he can't just not do anything. And so that's a really big struggle for him. I think that Johnny at his core is, you know, just a really good person. I think the way that King goes through and builds the novel as it goes, again, it has that slow burn quality. And I just thought that that was absolutely masterful. He did such an amazing job of doing that. You know, the first half of the book is really us getting to know Johnny, and then we get into the Castle Rock section, you know, where he's asked to help. And he does not have to do this at all. He just does it because he's a good person. And when we get to Castle Rock, again, there's not really been an antagonist through this. You've kind of seen like glimpses of people, but no real like main central bad person. So you really just have Johnny and his personality and this gift that he has. That's really what's driving the plot. Of course, you get to the point where Greg Stilson kind of enters into the foray, you know, and that really does kind of change things a little bit. He does become one of the main points of the book, but that doesn't happen until, you know, roughly halfway through. And so, you know, you have that character development, and, you know, that's what's really pushing it along. So when Greg Stilson kind of enters into the plot, you know, we see immediately that he is a bad man, right? Capital letters. And Johnny, being the good person that he is, you know, he feels like he has to do something about this. And this is one of the first times that we really see explored in King's work, you know, seeing what he can see and knowing what he knows. It kind of opens up the question, you know, if you could go back in time and kill Hitler, would you do that? Well, we see King explore that whole idea many more times throughout his writing, which I'm getting ahead of myself there, but those of you that are very familiar with his work, especially 11/22/63, you know, it was very interesting to me, having read that book before I had read this one, seeing that this is one of the first times that he had really, you know, discussed that idea. So this whole conflict with Stilson and this whole idea of if you could go back in time and save this person, or, you know, and change this thing, would you? That really kind of pushes our story to its climax and its end, which of course is tragic. I feel like Johnny, while a good person, you know, and a very sympathetic character, you know, he is also a very tragic character as well. I also feel like one of the other reasons that he's kind of tragic as a character is, you know, he goes through and does these things for the good of other people, but this gift that he has also kind of takes away the people that he loves. You know, as a direct result of the coma that he goes in, he loses Sarah, who is the love of his life, who he does later reconnect with. He also kind of loses his mother because his mom ends up joining this really weird religious cult while he's in the coma as a way to kind of help her cope. And that, while it helped her cope, you know, ultimately led to the strain that led to her death. So, you know, this gift, the coma, you can see like the progression of the events there. And then also going back to Sarah, I did really enjoy the progression of that relationship, because I feel like that's one thing that King can kind of failed to do up until this point. When we look at, say, for example, in Salem's Lot, why can't I remember her name? I'm so bad at this. Susan, and I can't remember the guy's name now. This is supposed to be my favorite book. Y'all, I'm tired. Ben. That's his name. So when we look back at Ben and Susan's relationship in Salem's Lot, like, it was just like there, you know, there wasn't really like a progression of that relationship. And that was one of my biggest complaints about that book, is that, you know, Susan is supposed to be kind of a catalyst in that book versus, you know, Sarah. There was a lot more development within this relationship. It was a lot more nuanced, and so I really did appreciate that. So overall, just, you know, as a whole, I think that this is one of King's most well-plotted, well-thought-out, well-executed books, you know, up until this point. You know, and I really think that this is where we start to see some of his greatest writing. And then later on, we see some not so great writing, but we'll get there when we get there. Okay, so now we're going to transition, and we are going to talk about some themes and motifs throughout this book. So I would venture to say that the biggest theme that runs through this is definitely, like, quote unquote, the greater good. And that's kind of a repeat from The Stand. You know, it's kind of this idea of, you know, doing the right thing, no matter how hard that it may be, no matter the cost that it may be to you. You know, it's just on a much smaller scale than it is in The Stand. In The Stand, you have this whole community that is dealing with, you know, this whole greater good thing. And here you just have Johnny. And I think that that is what makes him such a successful successful character and so relatable in a way. And it makes that whole idea very impactful, because when you're looking at it, you know, on this grand scale, like in The Stand, it feels very different than it does when you're looking at it from just this one person who, you know, has this like moral responsibility to do the right thing, you know, obviously, even though it's really difficult to do that. Another theme that goes through this book is kind of fate and how we deal with it. The Wheel of Fortune is something that's brought up over and over again throughout this book. You know, Johnny has this gift and the ability to subsequently possibly change the outcome of certain things. And, you know, that really kind of calls into question the entire notion of fate, I think. You know, and really asks the question, how much free will do we actually have? Those are really the two biggest themes. Like, I'm sure that there were probably some other ones. You know, those were the two that I really felt like were, you know, the most important and the biggest things in there. And usually I take a second to talk about each character individually. Well, I say each character, the main characters that go through the plot. However, I do feel like this story centers around Johnny, and I've already talked a lot about him. I do feel like most of the other characters are kind of secondary and inconsequential to the plot itself, you know, and really pushing things along. So I don't really feel like I need to waste time talking about each of these characters. Really, with the exception of Stilson, none of the other characters really do anything for the plot. And I briefly touched on like how Stilson moves the plot, and so I'm kind of actually going to skip this section for this time. So now we get to my favorite part, which is always the connections. This is my favorite part about going through and doing this series, is really like deep diving and finding little connections throughout the book to his other works. So first of all, let's talk about how Sarah lives in an apartment on Flag Street. Flag with 2 G's, representing Randall Flagg, who is our main protagonist in, not protagonist, antagonist, who is our main antagonist in The Stand, and he continues to pop up through King's body of work. Another connection that we find, Johnny's mother, when she becomes ill, she actually ends up at Cumberland General, I think is it called? Yeah, Cumberland General, which is mentioned in Salem's Lot as a nearby hospital. So King actually gets really meta in this book because he actually does mention his first novel, Carrie, by name. So that's a thing. Another connection, at one point during the book, Johnny is going through and tutoring a high school student. And the high school student is actually a student at Stovington Prep, which, if you have read The Shining, you know that that is the school that Jack Torrance was teaching at before he went to be the caretaker at the Overlook Hotel. And really the last biggest connection that I can find, we know that The Gunslinger was published after this particular book. However, I'm pretty sure that King had started work on this story before now. So there actually is a reference in this book to Childe Roland to the Dark Tower Came, which is the poem and, you know, almost part of the inspiration for the Dark Tower series and the Gunslinger in general. And at one point, the child that Johnny is tutoring does read a poem about a gunslinger, or a story about a gunslinger at one point as well. So we kind of are looking into the future here, because the Gunslinger is coming up pretty soon. I think there's a couple more books in between now and then. So those are the connections. So that is the Dead Zone, and I love the Dead Zone. Once again, I want to point out I'm not the authority on this. These are my thoughts and my opinions, and I am not a scholar. This is something that I do for fun. So, you know, if I miss something, by all means point it out. Just, you know, don't get ugly about it. Tell me how you felt about this book if you have read it. Comment down below and let me know. I would say keep it spoiler free, but I have a feeling if you're here, you don't really care about spoilers, because this video is full of spoilers, right? So anyway, yes, tell me how you feel about this book. Comment down below and let me know. Next time we will be discussing Firestarter, so look forward to that. As always, if you like what you see and you want to see more, make sure you click thumbs up and hit subscribe if you haven't already. Also, there is an entire playlist, which I will link in the cards up above for you if you would like to revisit any of the videos up until this point. I also have, you can see on the shelf behind me, because a lot of people tend to find me from my Stephen King videos. If you're new here, hi, hello. I do have a video where I go through my collection of Stephen King books. I can also link that in the cards up above as well. Maybe I already said this, but as always, if you like what you see and you want to see more, make sure you click thumbs up and hit subscribe if you have not already. If you want to be notified of my latest videos, make sure you click the bell as well. So that's all I have for this time. Thank you guys, and I will see y'all next time. Bye.